Some men spend their whole lives running from the desert. Caleb Mercer spent 15 years running from a memory. The wind moved across Red Canyon like a whisper from another time, carrying dust, dry sage, and the faint scent of rain that never seemed to arrive. Caleb sat alone on the porch of his weathered cabin, a place so far from town that even maps seemed to forget it existed. The Arizona sun was sinking behind the red cliffs, painting long shadows across the earth. Most evenings looked the same out here. The same silence. The same empty horizon. The same ghosts. Caleb lowered his eyes to the small turquoise pendant resting in his palm. The stone was worn smooth from years of handling. Some people carried photographs. Some carried letters. Caleb carried regret. Nobody in the nearby settlements knew much about him. They knew he fixed fences when they broke. They knew he rarely spoke more than necessary. They knew he always left town before sunset. But they did not know why. They did not know why a man with steady hands sometimes stared into nothing for several minutes at a time. They did not know why he never entered a church, never attended celebrations, and never spoke about the years before he arrived in Arizona. Those stories belonged to another life. A life Caleb wished he could forget. The evening breeze lifted the edge of his hat. Somewhere beyond the canyon walls, a coyote called into the fading light. Caleb listened for a moment, then slipped the pendant back into his pocket. He had almost convinced himself it would be an ordinary night. Then he heard the hoofbeats. Slow. Distant. Uncertain. He stood immediately. Visitors rarely came this far west. Travelers avoided Red Canyon after dark. Too isolated. Too easy to get lost among the twisting rock formations and dry washes. Caleb stepped off the porch and looked toward the trail leading into the valley. The rider appeared as a small silhouette against the orange sky. At first he thought it was a ranch hand. Then he noticed the rider was much older. The horse moved carefully, picking its way over loose stone. When the stranger finally approached within 50 feet, Caleb recognized him. It was an Apache elder named Takoda. Caleb had seen him only once before, years ago, during a trading trip near the reservation boundary. The old man guided his horse to a stop and simply stared. No greeting. No smile. No anger. Just silence. A heavy kind of silence. The kind that seemed to belong to something unfinished. Caleb felt a strange tension settle into his chest. Evening, he said quietly. Takoda did not answer right away. The elder studied him as though searching for something hidden beneath the dust and years. Then his weathered face slowly lost all color. His eyes widened. Not with fear. With recognition. The old man climbed down from his horse without breaking eye contact. For several seconds neither spoke. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Takoda whispered 4 words that made Caleb's blood run cold. You are still alive. Caleb froze. The elder's gaze drifted toward the distant cliffs of Red Canyon. 15 years, he said softly. For 15 years, my people believed the ghost of Red Canyon was dead. The wind rose suddenly between them. And for the first time in many years, Caleb Mercer realized his past had finally found him. The old man did not stay long. That was what troubled Caleb most. Takoda had ridden all the way to Red Canyon, spoken a handful of words, and then disappeared back into the darkness as though he had delivered a message that could not be taken back. Caleb stood outside long after the elder was gone. The stars slowly emerged above the Arizona desert, bright enough to turn the black sky into a river of silver. Sleep never came. Every creak of the cabin sounded louder than usual. Every gust of wind carried memories he had spent years trying to bury. By sunrise, he was already saddling his horse. He told himself he was only checking fences along the southern wash. It was a lie. Something had changed the moment Takoda recognized him. Something was moving beneath the surface of the desert, and Caleb could feel it. The morning air was cool as he followed a narrow trail through sandstone cliffs. The land stretched endlessly in every direction. Dry riverbeds twisted across the valley floor like scars. Clusters of sagebrush clung stubbornly to life between red rocks baked by decades of sun. Around noon, dark clouds began gathering over the western horizon. Caleb noticed them immediately. Storms arrived quickly in this country. One moment the sky was clear. The next, rain could be racing through canyons 50 miles away. He urged his horse toward higher ground. Then he heard something unusual. Not thunder. Not wind. A cry. Faint. Distant. Human. Caleb stopped. The sound came again. Barely audible beneath the growing gusts. He turned his horse toward a narrow canyon cut deep into the earth. The walls rose nearly 60 feet on either side. Shadows covered the bottom despite the afternoon sun. The cry came a third time. This time closer. Caleb followed it around a bend and immediately saw the danger. Water. A sudden surge was rushing through the canyon floor. Not a full flood yet, but enough to turn loose rocks into obstacles and transform the dry wash into a fast-moving stream. And trapped near the center was a woman. She was struggling to keep her footing while carrying a leather satchel pressed tightly against her chest. Her dark hair whipped across her face in the wind. Rain began falling before Caleb could think. Large drops struck the dust, releasing the sharp scent of wet earth. The woman glanced toward him. Their eyes met for only a second. Fear flashed across her expression. Then the current shifted beneath her feet. Caleb did not hesitate. He guided his horse down the slope and moved toward her. The water climbed higher around their legs with every passing moment. The canyon was becoming a funnel. Rainwater from distant ridges was pouring toward them. "Take my hand," Caleb called. The woman stared at him. For a moment she seemed uncertain. Then another surge rushed past. She reached out. Caleb grabbed her wrist and steadied her. Together they moved toward the edge of the canyon. One careful step at a time. The climb was slow. The rocks were slick. The wind pushed against them. But eventually they reached solid ground above the wash. Both stood breathing heavily beneath the storm clouds. The woman still clutched the leather satchel. She seemed more concerned about it than herself. Caleb noticed strange turquoise beads sewn along its edge. His chest tightened instantly. He had seen craftsmanship like that before. Many years ago. In another life. The woman followed his gaze and quickly pulled the satchel closer. Neither spoke. Then lightning flashed across the distant horizon, and for the first time Caleb noticed the symbol stitched into the leather. The symbol of a tribe he had hoped never to see again. The storm followed them for another hour before finally drifting east toward the distant mesas. Dark clouds lingered overhead, but the worst of the rain had passed. Caleb led his horse along a narrow ridge overlooking the canyon while the woman walked beside him in silence. The desert below shimmered beneath fresh moisture. Small streams appeared where only dust had existed that morning. The scent of wet sage floated through the air. Neither seemed eager to speak. Caleb had spent years perfecting silence. Yet this silence felt different. Heavy. Watchful. The woman kept her satchel close, one hand resting on it as if protecting something precious inside. Every few minutes Caleb found himself glancing toward the turquoise beads woven into the leather. The craftsmanship was unmistakable. His stomach tightened each time he saw it. By late afternoon they reached a small shelter built against a sandstone wall. It was little more than a weathered overhang with enough space for a campfire and 2 bedrolls. Caleb often used it when storms caught him far from home. He gathered dry wood hidden beneath the rocks and soon a small fire crackled against the cooling air. The woman remained near the entrance, studying him. The flickering light revealed details he had not noticed before. She looked to be in her late 20s. Strong. Calm. Her dark eyes carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to difficult journeys. Eventually she spoke. "You knew the symbol." Caleb looked up sharply. She nodded toward the satchel. "I saw your face when you recognized it." The fire popped softly between them. Caleb stared into the flames. "Maybe." The woman tilted her head slightly. "Most people do not react that way." Caleb did not answer. Outside. The wind brushed against the canyon walls. Somewhere in the distance an owl called into the approaching night. The woman finally sat down across from him. "My name is Nita." Caleb hesitated. "Caleb." She repeated the name quietly. Not as a greeting. As though testing it against a memory. Something about that unsettled him. He changed the subject. "What is inside the satchel?" For the first time, a faint smile appeared. "Medicine." Caleb nodded. That made sense. He had noticed dried herbs tied along the outer flap. The scent reminded him of mountain cedar and wild lavender. Nita carefully opened the satchel and removed several small bundles wrapped in cloth. The moment she did, Caleb noticed something else. A second symbol hidden beneath the flap. Smaller. Older. His breathing stopped. He knew that mark. Not from stories. Not from rumors. From a single day 15 years earlier. A day he had spent trying to forget ever since. The firelight flickered across the leather. Memories surfaced without permission. Dust. Heat. Fear. A canyon filled with voices. Caleb immediately looked away. Nita noticed. "You have seen that symbol before." It was not a question. Caleb rose to his feet and stepped toward the edge of the shelter. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the rising moon. "A long time ago," he said quietly. Nita remained silent. Caleb appreciated that. Most people filled silence with questions. She simply waited. After several moments she spoke again. "An elder once told me stories about a stranger connected to that symbol." Caleb felt every muscle in his body tense. The wind seemed colder now. "What kind of stories?" Nita studied him carefully. "Stories about a man who vanished." Caleb turned slowly. The fire reflected in her eyes. "What happened to him?" Nita lowered her gaze toward the symbol stitched into the leather. "Nobody knows. Some believe he died. Others believe he became something else." She looked back up. "But everyone remembers his name." The words settled over the campfire like falling ash. Then Nita said something that made Caleb's heart sink. "Tomorrow, when we reach my people, they will recognize yours." Caleb did not sleep that night. The fire burned low, shrinking into glowing embers that pulsed softly beneath a blanket of ash. Across the shelter, Nita rested quietly with her satchel beside her, yet Caleb could not shake the feeling that the desert itself was watching him. "Tomorrow," she had said. Tomorrow her people would recognize his name. The words lingered in his mind long after the stars crossed overhead. Before dawn, he stepped outside. The air was cool enough to raise goosebumps beneath his coat. Red Canyon stretched before him in shades of silver and blue. Far to the east, the first hint of sunlight touched the horizon. For a few peaceful moments, everything felt still. Then he heard footsteps behind him. Nita emerged from the shelter carrying a small tin cup. Steam drifted upward from cedar tea she had prepared over the remaining coals. She handed him the cup without a word. Caleb accepted it. "Thank you." Nita nodded. "You look like a man who spent the night arguing with ghosts." Caleb almost smiled. "Almost. Maybe I did." They began traveling shortly after sunrise. The trail wound through sandstone formations shaped by centuries of wind and rain. Some rose nearly 100 feet into the sky. Others resembled ancient towers standing guard over the desert. The farther they traveled, the quieter Caleb became. Nita noticed. She noticed everything. Around midday they stopped beside a spring hidden beneath a cluster of cottonwood trees. Water trickled gently across smooth stones before disappearing into the dry earth. Nita knelt beside the stream and refilled several small medicine bottles from her satchel. Caleb watched from a distance. Finally he asked the question that had been following him since the previous night. "Why are you not afraid of me?" Nita looked up. "Should I be?" Caleb hesitated. "You said your people know my name." "Some do." "And?" Nita secured a cork stopper into one of the bottles. "Stories change depending on who tells them." Caleb stared at the water. "Most stories about me are probably not good." Nita considered that for a moment. "My grandmother used to say that people see only the part of a mountain facing them." Caleb frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means nobody sees the whole truth." The answer unsettled him more than accusation would have. He had spent years expecting judgment. Judgment made sense. It was predictable. Understanding was harder. Much harder. They resumed their journey. As afternoon faded, the land gradually changed. The canyon walls widened. Juniper trees appeared among the rocks. In the distance, smoke rose into the sky from several campfires. Nita noticed it first. "We are close." Caleb followed her gaze. A knot formed in his stomach. For 15 years he had avoided places like this. Avoided conversations. Avoided memories. Avoided names. Yet here he was riding directly toward them. The sun hung low when they reached a ridge overlooking a small Apache settlement nestled between cliffs and cottonwoods. Children played near the stream. Elders sat beneath shaded shelters. Horses grazed peacefully along the valley floor. It looked ordinary. Human. Familiar. That somehow made it harder. Nita stopped her horse. "Before we go farther, there is something you should know." Caleb felt his pulse quicken. Nita's expression softened. "The stories I heard growing up were not about a villain." Caleb blinked. "What?" "They were about a man who disappeared after saving someone important." The wind moved gently across the ridge. For a moment neither spoke. Then voices rose from below. Several people had spotted them. One elderly woman shaded her eyes and stared toward the ridge. Her expression changed instantly. The smile vanished from her face. The woman slowly stood. Others followed her gaze. One by one, conversations stopped. The entire valley seemed to freeze. And then Caleb realized they were not looking at Nita. They were looking at him. The valley remained silent long after the people noticed him. Caleb sat motionless in the saddle, feeling dozens of eyes fixed upon him from below. Children stopped running beside the stream. Elders slowly rose from their seats. Even the horses grazing near the cottonwoods seemed unusually still. The moment felt unreal, as if the desert itself had paused to witness what happened next. Caleb glanced toward Nita. She did not seem surprised. If anything, she looked relieved. "They know you," Caleb said quietly. Nita nodded. "Some do." "How?" She looked toward the settlement. "You will understand soon." That answer only deepened the knot in his stomach. For 15 years he had carried a single belief. If he ever crossed paths with these people again, he would be remembered for the wrong reasons. Yet nobody was shouting. Nobody looked angry. They simply watched. Nita guided her horse down the slope. Caleb followed because turning back now felt impossible. As they entered the settlement, the silence continued. The smell of cedar smoke drifted through the evening air. Lanterns were beginning to glow beneath the shelters. Somewhere nearby, a woman stirred a pot over a small cooking fire. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary people. Yet every face seemed connected to a memory Caleb could not fully escape. An elderly woman stepped forward from the crowd. Her silver hair was braided neatly down her back. Deep lines marked her face, but her eyes were clear and steady. Caleb immediately recognized her expression. It was the same look Takoda had worn at his cabin. Recognition. The woman approached slowly. For a moment, Caleb thought she might ask a question. Instead, she studied him carefully and smiled. A small smile. Gentle. Unexpected. "You are older," she said. Caleb blinked. Of all the things he expected to hear, that was not one of them. The woman chuckled softly. "Then again, so am I." A few people nearby smiled as well. Caleb stood speechless. Nita dismounted and greeted the woman with a respectful embrace. "Grandmother." Caleb looked between them. This was Nita's grandmother. The same grandmother who had apparently told stories about him. The older woman turned back toward Caleb. "You carried too much weight for too many years." Caleb felt his chest tighten. "You do not even know me." Her eyes softened. "Perhaps not." She glanced toward the turquoise pendant hidden beneath his shirt. "But I know why you carry that stone." Caleb froze. He had never shown it to anyone. Not once. The grandmother smiled knowingly. "Come." She gestured toward a larger shelter near the center of the settlement. "There is someone waiting." The sun disappeared completely as they crossed the village. Shadows stretched beneath the cottonwoods. Lantern light flickered against the canyon walls. Caleb could feel his heartbeat growing louder with every step. They stopped before a simple shelter built from wood and canvas. An old man sat inside beside a lantern. His hair was white. His shoulders narrow with age. Yet something about him felt familiar. The old man slowly looked up. The moment their eyes met, Caleb felt the world shift beneath his feet. He knew that face. Not from yesterday. Not from last year. From 15 years ago. The memory arrived instantly. A canyon. Dust in the air. A frightened young man wearing a turquoise medicine pouch. Caleb had not seen him since that day. The old man stared in silence for several seconds. Then a smile spread across his face. "Caleb Mercer," he said softly. "I wondered if I would ever see you again." Caleb could barely breathe. "That is impossible." The old man laughed gently. "No," his eyes glistened in the lantern light. "The impossible part is that you never came back." The old man's words lingered in the air long after he spoke them. Caleb remained standing at the entrance of the shelter, unable to look away. 15 years. 15 years of believing the past was buried somewhere beneath the dust of Red Canyon. 15 years of carrying questions nobody could answer. Yet here sat a man who should have existed only in memory. The lantern beside him flickered softly, casting warm light across his weathered face. Nita quietly stepped inside and placed her medicine satchel near the wall. The grandmother remained outside, giving them space. It felt as though everyone in the settlement understood this moment mattered. Everyone except Caleb. "How?" Caleb finally asked. His voice sounded rougher than he intended. The old man smiled gently. "That is usually the first question." Caleb sat across from him. "I thought I would never see you again. And yet here we are." The old man poured water into 2 small cups and offered one. Caleb accepted it automatically. His hands felt strangely unsteady. For several moments neither spoke. Outside, the sounds of the settlement drifted through the evening air. Children laughing. Horses shifting near the stream. The distant crackle of cooking fires. Life continuing. Normal. Peaceful. Caleb wondered how many nights he had imagined this conversation. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. None had looked like this. The old man studied him carefully. You still blame yourself. It was not a question. Caleb lowered his eyes. You do not know everything. Then tell me. The invitation caught him off guard. Nobody had ever asked. Nobody had wanted the truth. For years Caleb had hidden behind silence because silence was easier. Easier than explaining. Easier than remembering. Easier than admitting how deeply regret could shape a life. The lantern crackled softly. Caleb stared at its flame. I was young, he began. Too young to understand what was happening around me. I thought I was helping people. I thought I was doing the right thing. His jaw tightened. Then everything changed. The old man listened without interruption. Caleb appreciated that. After that day, I kept asking myself the same question. He paused. What if I had done more? Outside, a cool breeze moved through the cottonwood trees. Nita sat quietly nearby, listening without judgment. Caleb continued. What if I had stayed? What if I had gone back? What if someone needed help and I was not there? The questions felt familiar. Worn smooth from years of repetition. The old man nodded slowly. Those are heavy questions. I have carried them a long time. Too long. Caleb looked up. You make it sound simple. The old man smiled. No. I make it sound human. Silence settled between them again. Then the old man leaned forward slightly. Would you like to know something? Caleb nodded. For 15 years, people told stories about a man who disappeared after helping someone in need. Caleb frowned. Helping? The old man laughed softly. You really do not know, do you? Before Caleb could answer, Nita reached into her satchel and carefully removed a folded piece of leather. The material looked old. Very old. She handed it to the elder. The old man unfolded it with remarkable care. Inside was a faded drawing. Caleb stared at it. His breath caught. Instantly. The sketch showed a younger man standing beside a horse beneath the cliffs of Red Canyon. The details were simple, but unmistakable. It was him. The old man placed the drawing in Caleb's hands. Every child here knows this picture. Caleb looked up in disbelief. The elder's eyes softened. Because the story you remember is not the story we were told. Caleb stared at the faded drawing long after everyone else had fallen silent. The edges of the leather were cracked with age. The charcoal lines had softened over time. Yet there was no mistake. The young rider beside the horse was him. Not the man he had become, but the man he had once been. A man who still believed some mistakes could be fixed. A man who had not yet spent 15 years hiding from his own reflection. His thumb brushed across the sketch. Who drew this? He asked quietly. The old man smiled. I did. Caleb looked up in surprise. You. The elder nodded. During the winter after you disappeared. He leaned back in his chair. I wanted the children to remember. Caleb felt more confused than ever. Remember what? The old man exchanged a glance with Nita. She lowered her eyes as if she already knew what was coming. Then the elder took a slow breath. The day you arrived, I was not an old man. His gaze drifted toward the shelter entrance where moonlight spilled across the ground. I was younger than you are now. Caleb listened carefully. People often tell stories about that year, the elder continued. Most tell them differently. But I remember exactly what happened. The lantern flickered softly. Outside, The sounds of the settlement had grown quiet. Only the wind remained. I remember getting lost in Red Canyon after a storm. Caleb's chest tightened. The memory surfaced immediately. He remembered searching the canyon. He remembered finding someone alone. He remembered the fear in the man's eyes. The elder smiled faintly. I remember a young cowboy who should have kept riding. Caleb lowered his gaze. I almost did. Yes. The old man chuckled. You told me that once. A strange silence followed. Then the elder's expression softened. But you stayed. Caleb swallowed hard. He had replayed that day countless times. Yet hearing it from someone else felt different. More real. More human. The elder folded his hands together. What you never understood was what happened afterward. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? Nita finally spoke. You left before you saw the rest. Caleb turned toward her. The rest of what? She hesitated. For the first time since meeting her, she seemed emotional. The people who came looking. Caleb stared. People came. The elder nodded. Many. Caleb's mind raced. I did not know. Of course you did not. The old man smiled gently. You were already gone. The firelight danced across the walls of the shelter. The elder looked toward Nita. She reached into her satchel once more and carefully removed a small object wrapped in cloth. Her movements were slow, respectful. Caleb watched as she unfolded the fabric. Inside lay a turquoise pendant nearly identical to the one hidden beneath his shirt. Caleb froze. Nita held it carefully in both hands. This belonged to my father. Caleb felt the air leave his lungs. Your father? Nita nodded. The man you helped in Red Canyon. For a moment the world seemed to disappear. The shelter. The lantern. The valley outside. Everything faded except those words. The man. Her father. Caleb looked from the pendant to Nita and back again. Suddenly he understood the familiar shape of the medicine satchel. The familiar stories. The strange kindness everyone had shown him. Nita's eyes glistened in the lantern light. My father spent the rest of his life telling us about the stranger who refused to leave him behind. Caleb could not speak. Nita smiled softly. The reason I recognized your name was because I grew up hearing it. Then she placed the pendant beside his drawing. And tomorrow, she whispered, you will finally learn why my father never stopped waiting for your return. Morning arrived slowly over the valley. Golden sunlight spilled across the canyon walls, turning the red stone into rivers of fire. Caleb had barely slept. The conversation from the night before echoed through his thoughts again and again. Nita's father. The stories. The drawing. The pendant. Every piece of the puzzle had begun fitting together, yet the picture still felt incomplete. He stepped outside the guest shelter and breathed in the cool desert air. Smoke rose from breakfast fires. Children chased one another near the stream. Horses grazed peacefully beneath cottonwood trees. It looked like any ordinary morning. Yet for Caleb, nothing felt ordinary anymore. He spotted Nita waiting near the edge of the settlement. Her medicine satchel rested across her shoulder. Come with me, she said. Caleb followed without asking questions. They traveled on foot along a narrow trail that wound through the cliffs behind the village. The path climbed steadily. Loose stones shifted beneath their boots. Juniper trees clung to cracks in the rock. Above them, hawks circled against a cloudless Arizona sky. After nearly half an hour, they reached a ridge overlooking the entire valley. The view stretched for miles. Red mesas rose in the distance. Dry riverbeds carved silver lines through the desert floor. The settlement below appeared small against the vast landscape. Nita stopped beside a weathered stone marker. This place mattered to my father. Caleb studied the simple monument. No elaborate carvings. No decorations. Just a smooth stone standing quietly beneath the open sky. Why? He asked. Nita smiled softly. Because this is where he waited. Caleb frowned. Waited for what? Nita looked toward the horizon. For you. The answer struck harder than Caleb expected. He stared at the stone. That does not make sense. It did to him. Nita knelt and brushed dust from the base of the marker. Every year he came here. Caleb felt a lump form in his throat. Every year. Nita nodded. He believed one day you would return. The wind moved gently across the ridge. Caleb struggled to understand. For 15 years he had imagined disappointment. Anger. Regret. Never this. Never gratitude. Why would he wait for me? Nita stood slowly. Her eyes reflected the morning sunlight. Because you changed his life. Caleb shook his head. I only helped him once. Nita smiled sadly. Sometimes once is enough. They stood in silence for several moments. Then Nita reached into her satchel and removed a folded letter. The paper looked old and fragile. She handed it to Caleb carefully. My father wrote this before he passed away. Caleb accepted it with trembling hands. For me. For the man who might someday return. The desert suddenly felt very quiet. Caleb unfolded the letter. The handwriting was uneven but clear. He began reading. The first few lines stole his breath immediately. Not because of what they said. Because of what they did not say. There was no blame. No bitterness. No mention of old mistakes. Only gratitude. Gratitude for a stranger who had stopped when others might have kept writing. Gratitude for kindness shown without expecting anything in return. Caleb read every word twice. Then a third time. By the end, his vision had blurred. He lowered the paper slowly. Nita watched him carefully. Now you understand. Caleb stared toward the endless desert beyond the ridge. For the first time in 15 years, he realized something extraordinary. The prison he had been living inside was not built by anyone else. It had been built by his own guilt. And standing there beneath the Arizona sky, holding a letter written by a man who had already forgiven him, Caleb Mercer finally began wondering whether it was possible to forgive himself. The sun was beginning to set when Caleb and Nita returned to the settlement. Long shadows stretched across the valley floor. The cottonwoods glowed gold in the evening light. Smoke drifted lazily from cooking fires. Everything looked exactly as it had the day before. Yet Caleb felt as though he were seeing it for the first time. For years he had moved through life carrying a burden nobody could see. He had convinced himself that regret was a debt that could never be paid. That some mistakes followed a man forever. But now, with the letter folded carefully inside his coat and the desert breeze brushing against his face, something inside him felt lighter. Not healed completely. Not yet. But lighter. The grandmother was waiting beside the central fire when they arrived. Several elders sat nearby. Children played in the distance. Horses grazed near the stream. Ordinary life continued around them, peaceful and unhurried. The old woman smiled as Caleb approached. You found the ridge. Caleb nodded. I found more than that. Her eyes sparkled knowingly. Yes. She motioned for him to sit. For a while nobody spoke. They simply watched the sunset paint the cliffs in shades of amber and crimson. Sometimes silence carried more wisdom than conversation. Eventually the elderly man from the shelter joined them. He moved slowly but comfortably, carrying a small wooden box beneath one arm. Caleb immediately noticed it. The box looked old. Handcrafted. Important. The elder settled beside the fire and placed it carefully on the ground. Then he opened it. Inside rested several items wrapped in cloth. A carved wooden figure. A bundle of letters. A faded photograph. And finally, another turquoise pendant. The elder lifted it gently. The stone glowed softly in the firelight. Caleb stared. It was nearly identical to the one he had carried for 15 years. The elder smiled. Your pendant was never meant to be carried alone. Caleb felt his throat tighten. The elder extended the stone toward him. This belonged to my family. Caleb hesitated. I cannot take that. You are not taking it. The elder's smile deepened. You are returning it. Confusion crossed Caleb's face. The old man laughed softly. You still do not understand. He pointed toward the pendant hanging beneath Caleb's shirt. One was carried by gratitude. Then he held up the second pendant. The other was carried by regret. The fire crackled between them. Neither belonged apart. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Caleb slowly removed the pendant he had carried for so many years. The turquoise stone rested in his palm. Worn smooth by time. Worn smooth by sorrow. The elder placed the second pendant beside it. The two stones fit together perfectly. Not identical. Complementary. Two halves of a story. Caleb stared at them as emotion rose unexpectedly in his chest. 15 years. 15 years spent believing he had been forgotten. 15 years spent running from a past that had never been chasing him at all. Around the fire, nobody applauded. Nobody gave speeches. Nobody demanded explanations. They simply sat together beneath the darkening Arizona sky. Present. Patient. Human. Nita smiled quietly across the flames. The grandmother closed her eyes and listened to the wind moving through the cottonwoods. Above them, the first stars appeared one by one. Caleb looked toward the vast desert beyond the valley. The same desert he had crossed countless times. The same desert he had blamed for his loneliness. Yet tonight it felt different. Softer somehow. As though the land itself had been waiting for him to finally stop carrying what was never his to keep. He slipped both pendants into his pocket and smiled. A real smile. The first in many years. And as darkness settled gently over the valley, Caleb Mercer understood something at last. Out here, redemption did not arrive with noise. It arrived quietly, like rain after a long drought. Patient enough to wait 15 years. Strong enough to make even the driest desert bloom again. 5 years later spring returned to Red Canyon with the rare rains that made wildflowers bloom across the red hillsides. Caleb stood in front of the new wooden house built beside the stream, watching the last rays of sunlight stretch across the valley. The sound of children laughing drifted from the backyard. Mom! I found it. A little boy, about 4 years old, ran through the grass holding up a small turquoise stone. Nita laughed softly and bent down to gather her son into her arms. You've gotten your clothes dirty again. The boy only giggled and ran toward Caleb. Dad, look! Caleb lifted him into his arms. In that moment, he remembered the lonely man who had once sat alone on the porch of a cabin in Red Canyon many years ago. That man seemed to belong to another life. Nita walked over and stood beside him. The silver ring on her hand shimmered in the sunset light. What are you thinking about? She asked. Caleb looked toward the distant village, where trails of cooking smoke drifted into the evening sky. Then he looked at the woman and child beside him. A home. A family. A life he once believed he did not deserve. Caleb smiled and wrapped his arms around them both. I was just thinking, that after all